sure about this?" Luke whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling of leaves outside the broken windows. The five of them, Luke, Ryan, Kayla, Olivia, and Mason, stood, huddled in the middle of the abandoned house, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the thick, undisturbed dust. The old house had been empty for decades, its wooden frame sagging under years of decay. Faded wallpaper peeled off the walls, revealing claw-like marks in the wood beneath. "I read about it online," Olivia said, her voice wavering despite her attempt at confidence. "The ritual only works if we take the photo in complete darkness. No lights, no flash. Just the phone camera capturing whatever's in the room." Mason scoffed. "And if it works, what? A ghost appears?" "Please." "Not just that," Olivia corrected. "They say someone always disappears after." A chill ran down Luke's spine. "That part wasn't in the post you sent." Olivia shifted uncomfortably. I didn't want to freak you guys out." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Come on, let's just get this over with. We take the picture, see nothing happens, and then we leave this dump." Luke swallowed hard but nodded. The air smelled damp and stale, like something long dead had been left to rot. He couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was watching them. Mason positioned the phone in the center of the group. "Okay, everyone lean in." They gathered close, pressing shoulders together. "On three," Mason said. "1, 2. With a shaky breath, Olivia clicked off her flashlight. The room plunged into total darkness. 3. A dull click sounded as Mason snapped the picture. Silence. Then, a deafening bang shattered the stillness, like something massive had just slammed into the walls. The entire house seemed to shudder. "What the hell was that?" Kayla yelped. Luke fumbled for his flashlight, but his fingers trembled too much to find the switch. The air had changed thicker, heavier, like it was pressing against them. Mason's phone screen lit up as he checked the picture. His face paled instantly. "Dude, what?" Ryan started, but Mason thrust the phone forward. The photo showed 6 people. There had only been 5 of them. The extra figure stood in the background, tall and featureless, nothing more than a perfect black silhouette. And worse, "Where's Kayla?" Olivia whispered. Luke spun around. "Kayla?" Silence. A moment ago, she'd been right there. Now, she was gone. "Okay, this isn't funny," Ryan snapped, shining his flashlight wildly around the room, but there was no sign of her. A slow, rhythmic creaking sound came from the second floor. Everyone froze. The creaking grew louder, deliberate, like footsteps pressing into the weak, rotting wood. "No way," Mason breathed. "Kayla?" Olivia called, voice trembling. The creaking stopped. Then, a guttural, rasping breath sounded from the top of the stairs. Luke's stomach clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. His flashlight flickered, and a shape stood at the top of the stairs. It looked like Kayla, but something was wrong. Her head was tilted too far to one side, her mouth hanging open unnaturally wide. Her arms dangled at her sides, motionless. "Guys," Mason whispered, "we need to get out of here." The thing that looked like Kayla took a step forward. The wood beneath her groaned. Then, in a blur, she lurched down the stairs, too fast, too wrong. Luke turned and ran. A crash erupted behind him, Ryan shouting, Olivia screaming, Mason yelling something unintelligible. Luke reached the front door and yanked it open, only to find another Kayla standing outside. But this one was smiling, and her lips weren't moving. But Luke heard her voice, right inside his head. "Why are you leaving? Don't you want to stay with me?" His breath caught. A hand-cold, skeletal gripped his wrist from behind. He turned, heart pounding, and the world went black. Luke's vision blurred as he felt himself being yanked backward into the house. His scream never left his throat. A suffocating darkness swallowed him whole. Insolence. When he opened his eyes, the house was different. The peeling wallpaper was gone. The floorboards looked new. There was no dust, no decay. The air smelled clean, almost sterile. But something was wrong, too quiet, too still. "Guys," he called. No answer. His chest tightened. He spun around and saw the front door was gone, just a solid wall where it had been. "Hello?" A whisper just behind him. "You're not supposed to be here." Luke whipped around, heart hammering. The hallway stretched unnaturally long, endless, fading into a dim, pulsing darkness. Then he heard footsteps running, footsteps coming straight for him. Too many. They thundered from every direction, pounding against the floorboards, the walls, the ceiling. Shadowy figures flickered in and out of existence in his peripheral vision. Faceless, featureless. But watching, Luke turned and ran. He bolted through the hallway, his breath ragged, his legs screaming. A door slammed shut. Another, and another. Every door he tried was locked. He could feel something closing in, its presence pressing against his mind like cold fingers, dragging down his spine. Then, a voice, Kayla's voice right in his ear. "Luke, wake up." He stumbled, his head pounding. He wasn't asleep. This wasn't a dream. Or was it? A flash blinding, white hot. Then he was somewhere else. Meanwhile, back in the real world, Ryan, Mason, and Olivia stood frozen in the house, their breath visible in the suddenly freezing air. "Where the hell did Luke go?" Mason hissed, scanning the room. "He was just the was," Olivia stammered. Ryan grabbed Mason's phone and checked the photo again. His stomach dropped. Luke was in the picture, but he wasn't facing the camera anymore. His head was turned, looking over his shoulder, and standing behind him was that same dark silhouette. Then, the phone screen cracked. Not like a regular crack, something underneath the glass moved, as if something was trying to push through. Mason dropped the phone with a yelp. It shattered on impact, the pieces skittering away like living things. A low, distant laugh echoed through the house. Then a whisper right beside Olivia's ear. "It's not just Luke." The temperature plummeted. Their breaths came out in white clouds. The front door slammed shut. The room tilted. The entire house shifted, like the walls were breathing. Ryan grabbed Olivia's arm. "We need to get out. Now." Mason reached for the door. It wouldn't budge. A scratching sound started from inside the walls. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Like fingernails dragging along the wood. Then, a single knock. Slow. Deliberate. From inside the wall, the knocking spread. Faster, louder, cascading through the entire house. Then silence. The door creaked open on its own. They didn't wait. They ran. They didn't stop until they reached Ryan's car. They piled inside, shaking, breathless. "Where's Luke?" Olivia whispered. No one answered. Mason pulled out his backup phone and opened his camera app. "I need to see it again," he muttered, hands trembling. He scrolled through the photos. His breath caught. The photo was different now. The dark silhouette was gone, but so was Luke. It was just the four of them in the picture, like he had never been there at all. Olivia's lip quivered. We have to go back. We can't just leave him." Ryan swallowed hard. "I don't think we can go back." They all turned, gazing at the house through the windshield. It was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there in the first place. And then, Mason's phone screen glitched. A single text notification popped up from an unknown number. It read, "Don't look for me," and attached to the message, a photo of Luke standing in a doorway, his face blurred, and behind him, a dozen more silhouettes, all smiling. The moon hung heavy and swollen in the ink-black sky, its pale light carving jagged shadows through the trees. The five of us stood in the clearing, a crude circle of salt and symbols drawn into the cold earth between us. A faint wind rustled through the dead leaves, but other than that, the woods were silent. Too silent. We had done this before more times than we cared to admit. At first, it had been a joke. A dumb little ritual we found in an old book in Eric's basement. Something about calling out to those beyond the veil. We never expected it to work, and maybe, in a way, it hadn't. Not exactly. Because most of the time when we performed the ritual, nothing happened. Most of the time. But when it did work, well, that was the problem. We didn't always get what we called for. All right, is everyone ready? Eric asked, his voice hushed but urgent. He was our de facto leader, the one who had first dared us to try this. His hands were steady, but I could tell by the way his throat bobbed that he was nervous. We all were. Zoe was crouched near the edge of the circle, tracing the last symbol with a stick of red chalk. Her fingers trembled slightly. She was the best at this part, getting everything just right. One mistake, she always warned, and who knows what might happen. Mark and Julia stood opposite each other, candles in hand, their faces barely visible in the flickering light. The flames danced, casting eerie reflections on their wide, anxious eyes. And then there was me, the one who spoke the words, the one who always had to call. I swallowed hard and took my place at the head of the circle. The book lay open before me, its yellowed pages cracked and brittle. The language wasn't English, but by now we knew the words by heart. Ready? Zoe murmured. Go for it, Ben, Mark whispered. I drew in a slow, shaking breath and began to read. The moment the last syllable left my lips, the air changed. A low hum, deep and droning, vibrated through the ground beneath us. The candles flickered violently, their flames elongating unnaturally, twisting like reaching fingers. The trees surrounding the clearing seemed to close in, their darkened limbs stretching toward us. And then, the space within the circle collapsed inward. Not literally. The earth didn't move, but it felt like a vacuum had opened, like something had punched a hole in the world right before our eyes. A shape was forming. My breath caught in my throat. We had done this before. We knew what was supposed to happen. But something was wrong. Something was already in the circle. And this time, it wasn't what we had asked for. The figure stood in the center of the symbols, its body hunched and unfamiliar. It was wrong. The limbs were too long, the head tilted at a grotesque angle. I could hear a sound wind, labored breathing, something shifting beneath skin that didn't fit right. Julia whimpered, stepping back. The figure straightened. The movement was sharp, unnatural, like a marionette being yanked upright by unseen strings. Then it spoke. At least it tried to. The voice came out warped, cracking like dry branches. It was a voice that didn't belong to any human throat. Wrong place. The air turned icy. I couldn't breathe. None of us could. Then the thing lurched forward. Zoe screamed. Eric grabbed my arm. Close it, he yelled, shaking me. Now, Ben, close it now. I couldn't move. My body had locked up. The thing in the circle was twitching, struggling, like it didn't quite know how to stand on its borrowed legs. Its fingers flexed, the joints bending too far backward. It took another step, and then, all at once, it wasn't there anymore. No puff of smoke, no dramatic fade. It simply vanished. The air collapsed around us with a deafening rush, the pressure in my skull releasing like I'd been held underwater. The candles blew out, the trees stilled. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, from somewhere in the distance, we heard footsteps. Fast, running, getting closer. Go, Zoe hissed. We need to go now. We didn't need telling twice. We bolted, shoving our way through the trees, stumbling over roots and undergrowth. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The footsteps behind us weren't slowing. They were matching us. No, worse. They were gaining. I chanced to look over my shoulder and instantly regretted it. Something was moving through the trees, a shape flickering between the trunks, its form shifting in and out of the moonlight. It was fast, impossibly fast, and worse, it was silent. The running sounds hadn't been coming from it. They had been coming from something else. I didn't have time to warn the others. The ground beneath us tilted suddenly, the world flipping sideways as my feet caught on a root. I hit the earth hard, pain jolting up my side. Ben? Eric skidded to a stop, reaching for me. I opened my mouth to tell him to run. And then the whispering started. Soft, hissing voices slithering through the air around us. Not from one place, from everywhere. Zoe whimpered, pressing her hands to her ears. Julia grabbed Mark's sleeve, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers rose, merging into a sickening chorus of voices we didn't recognize. Voices that shouldn't be here. And then, right behind me, just inches from where I lay sprawled on the ground, a voice spoke my name. I didn't look. I couldn't, but I could feel it. The presence, right there, breathing against the back of my neck. Run, I choked out. No one hesitated. We tore through the trees, driven by a terror deeper than anything we had ever known. My body screamed in protest, but I forced myself to keep moving. The trees thinned ahead, the path widening, and then, suddenly, the whispers stopped. Just stopped. We stumbled to a halt, gasping for air. Silence pressed around us like a weight. The night was still, the moon bright overhead. For a moment, I almost believed it was over. And then, Zoe screamed. We turned just in time to see the circle. Right there, on the dirt path in front of us. The same symbols, the same candles, the same red chalk, as if we had never left. And standing in the middle of it was me. We froze. My mind refused to process what I was looking at, because it was me standing in the center of that circle. Not a reflection, not a shadow. An exact copy of me, down to the torn sleeve on my jacket and the dirt smeared across my cheek. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at us with wide, unblinking eyes. And then it smiled. Not a natural smile. Not mine. The corners of its mouth stretched too far, its lips peeling back to reveal teeth that looked just a little too sharp. "What the hell?" Mark whispered. The thing took a step forward. Zoe grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Ben," she choked out. "Do something." But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Because as the thing moved, I realized something even worse. It wasn't blinking. Not once. It just kept its wide, too human stare locked on me. Its grin stretching, stretching, stretching. Then it spoke. "We never left." Its voice was mine, but wrong. Twisted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I took a step back. The thing took a step forward. The whispers returned, curling through the air like fingers reaching for us. The others broke first. Julia let out a sob and turned to run. Mark and Eric followed, their footsteps crunching against the dead leaves. Zoe yanked me hard, snapping me out of my frozen daze. I turned ready to flee, but my copy was faster. It lunged forward with impossible speed, its limbs contorting mid-air. I barely had time to scream before it crashed into me. Pain exploded through my skull as I hit the ground. The thing was on top of me, its fingers digging into my shoulders. Its breath was hot and rancid against my face. "Don't," it whispered, tilting its head. "Run." I struggled, shoving at its chest, but it wasn't solid. Its skin rippled under my hands like I was pressing against water. And then I sank into it. Cold, suffocating cold, like plunging into a frozen lake. I was falling, but I wasn't moving. The world around me ripped apart. I gasped, my vision snapping into focus. I was standing, not on the ground, not anywhere, just standing in a vast, empty darkness. Shapes flickered in the distance, shadows moving, watching. And then I saw them. Mark, Julia, Zoe, Eric. They were still running, but I wasn't with them. I was here, in the dark, trapped. And I realized, with a horrible, gut-twisting certainty, the thing that tackled me wasn't just wearing my face. It had taken my place. It was running with them. I tried to scream, to call out, to tell them that it wasn't me, but no sound came. I was just watching through the veil of whatever this was. Then, something moved in the darkness beside me. A shape, tall, thin, wrong. It turned toward me, and though I couldn't see its face, I could feel its eyes boring into me. It whispered something, and though I didn't understand the words, I felt them slither into my bones. Then it pointed. I followed its gesture and saw another circle, just like the one in the woods, just like the one we made. And standing in the middle of it were more of us. Dozens, hundreds, all of them copies, all of them waiting for someone else to call them through. In the real world, the thing wearing my face slowed to a stop. The others skidded to a halt around it. "What is it?" Eric panted. The thing lifted its head, grinning too wide. It blinked for the first time, and then, in my voice, it whispered, "We need to go back." The others hesitated, confused. Julia glanced over her shoulder. "Why?" The thing smiled wider. "To finish the ritual." And as I screamed, unheard, trapped in the dark, the others nodded and turned back toward the circle. The forest surrounding Black Hollow was ancient. Its trees gnarled and twisted like grasping fingers against the night sky. Legends spoke of something buried deep within a force older than man, whispered about in fearful, hushed tones. No one dared venture past the rotting wooden fence that marked the boundary of the forbidden land, except for us. It started with a rumor. A lost manuscript, bound in human skin, surfaced in an online forum dedicated to the occult. A supposed grimoire detailing rituals thought to be erased from history. My friend Eric was the first to take the bait. His fascination with the unknown had always bordered on obsession, but this time, he was convinced we had stumbled upon something real. He roped in myself, Lisa, and John, a group of misfit thrill-seekers, to embark on a night we would never forget. We followed the instructions to the letter. Midnight, on the eve of the equinox. Candles made from the fat of an unbaptized infant. A circle of salt mixed with the crushed bones of an animal that had died in fear. Eric provided the book, his fingers trembling as he turned its brittle pages. The words were incomprehensible at first, written in an ancient language that seemed to shift under the flickering candlelight. Lisa was the one who finally cracked it, her voice quivering as she read aloud the incantation. The wind stopped. The air grew thick, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, a deep, guttural growl that resonated from beneath the earth, making the ground shudder beneath us. Jonah laughed nervously. "Nice effects, Eric. How'd you do that?" Eric didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the shadows just beyond our candlelight. A movement, slow, deliberate, a shape forming in the blackness. Lisa screamed first. I turned just in time to see something some stepping out from the darkness. Its body was contorted, limbs bending at angles that defied nature. Its face, if it could be called that, was an abyss, an empty void where features should have been. Yet I felt it looking at me, piercing into my very soul. The candles snuffed out all at once. The next moments were chaos. We ran, but the trees were closing in, the branches twisting and stretching as if they were alive. Something grabbed my ankle, cold fingers clawing into my skin. I kicked wildly, feeling bone snap beneath my foot, but it didn't let go. I heard Lisa sobbing, Jonah shouting Eric's name. Then a new sound, a whisper, gentle and seductive, crawling into my mind like an insect burrowing deep. "You brought me here. Now you are mine." I blacked out. When I woke, I was alone. The candles were gone, the book nowhere to be found. The forest was silent, as though it had never known life. My friends were missing. I stumbled back to town, delirious, my head pounding. The police didn't believe me. They searched the forest but found nothing. No sign of Lisa, Eric, or Jonah. Not even a footprint. That was 2 weeks ago. And last night, I heard the whisper again, in my room, right next to my ear. The nightmare didn't end there. This morning, I found muddy footprints trailing from my bedroom window to my bed. A single candle, half melted, sat beside my nightstand. The scent of burnt tallow clung to my sheets. My hands trembled as I traced the salt circle I had hastily placed around my room. It was disturbed, the lines broken. A text came through from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Look out." A knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. My breath hitched. I turned to the peephole and nothing but darkness. The knob rattled, and silence. The whispers grew louder that night. No sleep, no respite. I saw shadows move in the corners of my vision, heard my name spoken in voices not my own. The walls pulsed as if they were breathing. Then, at 3:13 a.m., the door opened on its own. A shape stood there, barely visible against the dim glow of the streetlights. My heart pounded as I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall. The thing stepped closer. My body was frozen, paralyzed by a force unseen. It bent down to me, that same void of a face hovering inches from mine. Then it whispered, that same voice from the woods. I told you, you are lapsed into darkness. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up. I was back in my bed, but everything felt wrong. The room was ice cold, my breath visible in the dim light. The air smelled of damp earth, decay, and something coppery, metallic. I glanced at my hands. They were covered in dirt. I tried to move, but my limbs were sluggish. My fingers tingled as if they had been asleep for hours. A dull ache throbbed at the back of my skull. I reached up and felt something sticky blood. My stomach twisted in knots. Then I noticed it. My phone was open on my nightstand. The screen was cracked, smeared with something dark, and on the screen was a single message. Time-stamped at 4 a.m., don't run. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. My pulse pounded against my ribs. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door. The knob was still rattling, as if someone had been holding it for hours, waiting. And then, the whispers started again this time, coming from inside the room. The silence was unbearable. It pressed against my ears like a living thing, suffocating me. The whisper had vanished, but its absence only deepened my dread. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone. The screen was cracked, smeared with something dark dirt, or perhaps dried blood. A single notification glowed in the darkness. You left them behind. A sickening dread pooled in my gut. I didn't respond. My breathing was ragged, uneven. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Lisa, Eric, Jonah, had I abandoned them? Had I fled while they were swallowed by the thing we had called forth? The memories were a blur of screams, shadows, and pain. My body ached with the weight of something unspoken. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against my bedroom door. I stared at the wood, frozen. My room was locked. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no way. The handle turned. A scream lodged in my throat as I threw myself backward. The door creaked open an inch, and the darkness beyond it bled into my room, curling in tendrils across the floor. A single eye, gleaming and lidless, appeared in the gap. It was watching me. It knew me. We never left. I kicked at the door, but my limbs were sluggish, useless. The shadows slithered in, stretching toward me. My lungs seized. My head swam. I scrambled for the salt circle around my bed, except it was gone. Erased. A hand gripped my ankle. I choked on a sob as I was yanked downward. The floor beneath me had become something else, something alive. It pulsed, sticky and warm, a gaping wound in reality itself. My body slid into the darkness, a pressure tightening around my ribs. My screams were swallowed whole. Then I was falling. The air smelled of decay and damp earth. My back slammed against something hard, the breath torn from my lungs. I coughed, my hands searching blindly. The ground was wet, uneven. The scent of iron clung to my skin. I was back in Black Hollow. A dim glow illuminated the clearing, the same one where we had performed the ritual. The air was thick with whispers, words I couldn't understand. I turned, my pulse roaring in my ears. Lisa stood at the edge of the trees. Her body was raw, twisted. Her eyes were black voids. Her mouth split too wide. Her skin sagged as if something inside her had hollowed her out. When she spoke, her voice was Laerter's, Eric's, Jonah's, and something else. Finish it. The book lay at my feet, pages fluttering though there was no wind. I didn't want to touch it. My mind screamed against it, but my body moved on its own. My fingers traced the worn cover. the grotesque symbol searing into my thoughts. The whispers grew frantic. Jonah appeared beside Lisa, his face melting in the shifting light. "You have to close the door." I flipped the pages. The final incantation burned in my mind like a brand. The wind howled through the clearing, though the trees remained still. The ground trembled beneath me, the earth cracking open. The thing that had hunted me, that had followed me beyond the hollow, was watching. I started to read. The words slithered from my tongue, foreign and unnatural. The shadows convulsed. The thing lurking beyond the trees shrieked, a sound that cleaved the sky. The figures of my friends flickered, their forms unraveling. A force slammed into me, knocking me onto my back. The book was torn from my hands. I gasped, struggling to move, but invisible fingers held me in place. Above me, the sky fractured, something vast and endless peering through. It did not want to be sent back. My mind shattered beneath its gaze. I forced the final words past my lips. My voice, a desperate, broken whisper. A howl erupted from the clearing. The darkness recoiled, screaming. The air turned electric. The figures of my friends burst into ash, carried away by the sudden, violent wind. And then, silence. I was on my knees, alone. The book was gone. The forest was still. The sky above was empty once more. I stood on shaking legs. My body ached, my skin cold and damp. I staggered from the clearing, the trees parting for me like they had been waiting. The night stretched on endlessly, but somehow I found my way home. I locked the door, closed every window, placed salt at every threshold. But as I lay in bed, my body screaming for rest, I heard it. A whisper, faint, persistent. "You closed the door, but you left a window open." A chill crawled down my spine. I turned toward the window, heart pounding. It was open. Outside, in the darkness, something moved.